friends and future fellow funeral professionals. Welcome to another episode of Megan's Study Guide for the NBE. For this episode, I want to cover something that is going to play some importance. I don't think it is the most important thing, but as a practicing funeral director, it is important. And you never know. Again, I like to say, you've got a lottery you're playing with 4,000 questions, and I got one that nobody warned me about. In fact, it went against everything the conference promised me, so I was lied to. So you never know. I just want you to be prepared. So we are going to be reading the section on Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, as defined in the glossary of the conference's National Study Guide for the NBE, Volume 12.3. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump right in. It's not too long, I promise, and they're good terms. You need to know them. A lot of them will cover things like, you'll see, especially when you take your test. All right, and you should know a lot of them too. Alternative container, like that one. Unfinished wood box or other non-metal receptacle or enclosure without ornamentation or a fixed interior lining, which is designed for the encasement of human remains and which is made of fiberboard, pressed wood, composition materials, with or without an outside covering, or like materials. Alternative price lists. Price lists which may be prepared for use in certain limited situations, such as children and infants, for government agencies to provide for indigent persons, sorry, I can't talk today, for agreements with religious groups, burial or memorial societies for members of their group. Cash advanced items, these are very important to learn. Any item of service or merchandise described to a purchaser as a cash advance, or accommodation, or a cash disbursement, or a similar term. Okay, following? A cash advance item is also any item obtained from a third party and paid for by the funeral provider on the purchaser's behalf. Cash advance items may include, but are not limited to, cemetery or crematory services, pallbearers, in case they couldn't provide their own, public transportation, clergy honoraria, flowers, musicians or singers, nurses, obituary notices, gratuities, and death certificates. I know it's a lot. I'm sorry. Not my favorite term to remember. Casket. A rigid container which is designed for the encasement of human remains and which is usually constructed of wood, metal, fiberglass, plastic, or like metal materials, and ornamented and lined with fabric. Casket handling fees. All right, here we go. This is important. Charge, fee, or surcharge that is applied to consumers who purchase their casket elsewhere from a source other than the price list / funeral provider. Casket price list, or CPL. Printed or typewritten list of the casket and alternative containers normally offered for sale by the funeral provider, which does not require special ordering. The CPL must include retail price and enough descriptive information to enable consumers to identify the merchandise. Commission refers to the Federal Trade Commission, or FTC. Cremation, heating process which incinerates human remains. Crematory, any person, partnership, or corporation that performs cremation and sells funeral goods. Direct cremation, disposition of human remains by cremation without formal viewing, visitation, or ceremony with the body present. Exigent circumstances. Situation requiring immediate action or urgency. The FTC recognizes that the funeral provider might embalm without permission. That's a big point to make there. Federal Trade Commission, or FTC. Agency of federal government created in 1914 to promote free and fair competition by prevention of trade restraints, price fixing, false advertising, and other unfair methods of competition. The forwarding of remains. One of the 16 items specified required on the GPL if the funeral provider offers the service. This involves services of the funeral provider in the locale where the death occurs and preparation for transfer to another funeral provider as selected by the family or consumer. The funeral rule requires package pricing of this service with a description of the components included. Free items. None of the 16 specified items required to be separately itemized on the GPL that can be listed as free or of no charge. Items not required by the rule can be listed as free. Funeral ceremony. Service commemorating the deceased with the body present. Funeral goods. Goods which are sold or offered for sale directly to the public for use in connotation with funeral services. Funeral provider. Any person, partnership, or corporation that sells or offers to sell funeral goods and funeral services to the public. Funeral services. Any services which may use to 1. Care for and prepare the deceased human bodies for burial, cremation, or any other final disposition. And 2. Arrange, supervise, or conduct the funeral ceremony for the final disposition of the deceased human body. All right, general price list, GPL. Printed or typewritten list of goods and services offered for sale by a funeral provider with retail prices. Here, GPL is considered the keystone of the funeral rule. You need to remember that the GPL, it has to say general price list at the top. There's a bunch of rules with it, so please be familiar with the GPL. Be familiar with the casket price list. Be familiar with the alternative, like all of those. All right. Graveside service. A ceremony commemorating the deceased at place of final disposition. Immediate burial. Disposition of human remains by burial without formal viewing, visitation, or ceremony with the body present except for a graveside service. Itemization. A method of price quotation by which each unit of service and or merchandise is priced separately. That's important. Mandatory disclosures, also important. Statements required by the rule which cannot be modified or edited and must appear in a clear and conspicuous manner. That is super duper 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 important. Please remember that. Memorial service. You should all already know this one. A ceremony commemorating the deceased without what? The body present? Is that what you said? I'm so proud of you. Non-declinable service fees. Basic services is the only fee which the consumer cannot decline, in parentheses, unless state or local law requires otherwise, end parenthesis. Funeral providers should recover expenses for services, facilities, or unallocated overhead in this charge. That sounds fair. Outer burial container. Any container which is designed for placement in the grave around the casket, including, but not limited to, container commonly known as burial vaults, grave boxes, and grave liners. Outer burial container price list. Oh wait, no, I screwed that up. Outer curial, because it even says OBC. Like, I swear, I would have assumed that was a typo. Shows how much I know. Outer curial container price list, OBCPL. Printed and typewritten list of I'm so confused by this definition because I personally didn't learn this, so this is a new one for me. All right, let me start this over. Outer curial container price list, in parentheses, OBCPL, all right? Printed or typewritten list of outer burial containers normally offered for sale by the funeral provider, which does not require special ordering. OBCPL must include retail price and enough descriptive information to enable consumers to identify the merchandise. That's the new one to me. I'm not ashamed to admit that one. I learned something today. All right. Just gonna. All right, package pricing. Use of a single dollar amount to identify the charge for a group or bundle of goods and or services. Person. Any individual, partnership, corporation, association, government, or governmental subdivision, or agency, or other entity. Receiving remains. One of the 16 specified items. And you know what? You're going to want to remember 16 because they might ask you, like, how many items. So they repeat 16 for a reason. I'm just going to point that out. 16 specified items required on the GPL if the funeral provider offers the service. This involves services of the funeral provider after initial services have been provided by another firm at the locale of death. Funeral rule requires package pricing of this service with a description of the components included. Services of funeral director and staff. Basic services not to be included in prices of other categories in section that are furnished by a funeral provider in arranging any funeral, such as conducting the arrangement conference, planning the funeral, obtaining necessary permits, and placing obituary notices. Whew. Statement of funeral goods and services selected. Itemized written statement provided for retention to each person who arranges a funeral or other disposition. It must include the goods and services selected and prices paid for each itemization of cash advance items and their total cost. Telephone price disclosure. Oh, this is so important and you will be asked about it. Funeral provider must give consumers who call accurate information from the price lists and answer questions about offerings and prices with readily available information. Know that. You are not allowed to answer questions that only prices, okay? Remember that. You do not play funeral director. I cannot express that enough. You will get in so much trouble and your boss will get in so much trouble. And if you are an apprentice or an attendant, only funeral directors are allowed to answer a lot of questions, but you answering the phone, you absolutely can answer in regards to pricing, okay? Sorry for acting mad, just I've seen somebody get in a lot of trouble and it was no bueno, like not good. All right. Third-party merchandise. Funeral goods consumer purchased from a source other than the price list or funeral provider. Transfer of remain. You're going to want to know, I'm not going to add to it now, but you're going to want to know what the law is in regards to charging people for third-party merchandise. Like if somebody buys their own coffin, casket, whatever. You're going to want to know what the law is on that. Trust me, because they're going to want to, not going to get into it. Shut up, Megan. All right. Transfer of remains, also referred to as the removal. Here we go with 16. One of the 16 specified items required on the GPL, defined as the moving of the dead human body from the place of death to the funeral home or other designated place. Triggering event, occurrence of situation that requires certain action. Like the triggering event for giving out the GPL is face-to-face meeting. Tying arrangements. This exists when a seller requires the purchase of unwanted items or services in order to obtain the desired item or service. Last but not least, viewing. Calling hours, visitation, visiting hours, or wake. This is the time set aside for friends and relatives to pay their respects for the deceased prior to funeral service. All right, well, you know what? There we have it. That is yet another glossary chapter from the conference's official study guide for the NBE, volume 12.3. I hope you enjoyed this section, and I hope to see you guys again for my next episode. Thank you once again for your support, for being here, for listening to my podcast. I hope I'm helping you. If you have an exam coming up, I'm wishing you all the luck in the world. You've got this. I am here for you. I believe in you. Everybody listening to this podcast believes in you. We are all here together. We are all in it together. You are not alone. I want you to go sit for your exam, and I want you to be confident, because honestly, stress is going to be your undoing. And just, you know what? If you don't pass the first time, which I think you will, there's the second time. There's absolutely no shame in that. And you know what? Use the first time as a study tool, because seriously, I tell people, once you see how those questions are, everybody was so vague to me. Nobody wanted to just tell me how the frick to study. Like, nobody. I'm telling you what books to read. I'm telling you what's for word. I'm telling you, hey, this is important. I'm trying. But honestly, go into it and like take all that stress away and think, if I don't pass, like God forbid, maybe I walk away with knowing what to study, and you'll get it the second time. I guarantee it. Like, that is I believe that would be worst case scenario. So I believe you've got it. If you have your test, good luck. Otherwise, I hope everybody has a wonderful day or night, whatever this is for you. And again, thank you for joining me and supporting my podcast. I do have that YouTube channel, and I will start doing those wonderful religious practices with words that are going to be so much fun. And I'm going to do drawings and visual aids, and it's going to be fun. We're going to have fun doing it. So finally, a visual component to an audio recording that's also audio. So, you know, if you want to learn more about it, cool. If not, just stick to my podcast, you know? So anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful everything. All right? Take care, okay?